Okay, picture this Europe in 1914. It's a tangled web of alliances, simmering with nationalistic fervor. It feels like the whole continent is holding its breath, just waiting for something to snap. Then, boom, a single gunshot in Sarajevo. It shatters the fragile peace, and the world plunges headlong into the abyss of World War One.
It really is one of history's great paradoxes, isn't it? This seemingly isolated event, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie. It becomes the catalyst for a global conflict,
Yeah.
one that would reshape the world.
And that's exactly what we're going to deep dive into today. We've got a stack of historical articles and research to really unpack, and I'm so eager to hear your expert insights on all this.
Well, let's start by peeling back the layers of this complex historical tapestry. You might already know the basics of the assassination, but I think you'll be surprised by the intricate interplay of events and personalities leading up to that fateful day in June.
Oh, it already sounds like a recipe for intrigue to me. Okay, so let's set the stage. Our sources describe Europe in 1914 as, and I love this term, a tinderbox of tensions. You've got Austria-Hungary, this sprawling, multi-ethnic empire, and they've just annexed Bosnia-Herzegovina, which really ruffled feathers in neighboring Serbia.
Yeah, it wasn't just a minor diplomatic scuffle. Serbia, with its significant Serb population in Bosnia, they viewed themselves as a protector of Slavic interests in the region. And this annexation was a direct blow to their ambitions for a unified South Slav state. And to really understand that, we need to touch on the concept of Pan-Slavism, this powerful ideology that advocated for the unity of all Slavic peoples. It's a crucial piece of the puzzle.
So Austria-Hungary annexing Bosnia was like stepping on a hornet's nest, basically poking a very nationalistic bear.
Precisely. And right in the middle of this volatile situation, you have Franz Ferdinand,
Yep.
a man often portrayed as simply a symbol of imperial power. But he was actually a much more complex and, dare I say, fascinating figure.
Our sources definitely suggest there's more to him than meets the eye. I'm very curious to hear more about this side of Franz Ferdinand.
He wasn't just content to be a figurehead. He favored increasing federalism within the empire. Imagine that. Potentially granting more autonomy to the Slavic regions within Austria-Hungary.
That's a pretty radical idea for an heir to the throne, isn't it? I mean, wouldn't that go against the very core of the empire?
It would certainly have been a dramatic shift, and it helps explain why he became a target for groups like the Young Bosnians, who were fighting for a fully independent South Slav state. His reforms, if successful, might have undermined their entire goal. It's a bit of historical irony, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like he was trying to save the empire by reforming it. But those very reforms made him an enemy to those who wanted to see it dismantled. So tell me more about these young Bosnians. Who were they and what were they fighting for?
Imagine a group of idealistic students, intellectuals, and revolutionaries, all bound by this fervent belief in a unified South Slav state. They saw themselves as patriots, fighting for liberation from what they perceived as Austro-Hungarian oppression.
They sound almost romantic in a revolutionary kind of way, but I'm guessing things weren't quite that simple.
You're right. Their inspiration, believe it or not, stemmed from a centuries-old event, the legendary Battle of Kosovo in 1389. It became this symbol of Serbian resistance against the Ottoman Empire, and the young Bosnians were essentially trying to recreate that historical moment, to ignite a similar uprising against what they saw as a new oppressor.
So they were tapping into a deep well of historical memory and national identity. But were they acting alone, or did they have support from more established groups?
Here's where things get even more intricate. Enter the Black Hand, a shadowy Serbian nationalist organization with a much more direct and, let's be honest, violent approach. They were deeply involved in the plot, providing weapons, training, and even a secret smuggling route to get the assassins and their weapons into Sarajevo.
Whoa, a secret smuggling route. That definitely elevates this from student activism to something far more serious. So what about the Serbian government itself? Were they involved in any way, or is this more of a rogue operation by the Black Hand?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And you won't be surprised to hear that historians still debate this point fiercely. Some argue that the Serbian government must have at least been aware of the plot, even if they didn't actively support it. Others believe that the Black Hand acted independently, without any official sanction.
I can already see how this event, with all its tangled threads and unanswered questions, becomes the spark that ignites a global conflict. You've got these passionate revolutionaries, a shadowy organization possibly operating with government knowledge, and this backdrop of intense geopolitical tension. It feels like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to see what will happen next.
And it's precisely this context that makes the events of June 28, 1914 so pivotal. Because you see, the assassination attempt wasn't just a single clean act. It was a day riddled with missed opportunities, strange coincidences, and decisions that seem almost unbelievable in hindsight.
Wait, so there were multiple attempts on the Archduke's life that day? I thought it was just one fateful encounter.
You're in for a surprise.
Hmm.
There were actually several assassins stationed along the Archduke's route through Sarajevo, each with their own chance to strike.
It sounds more like a spy thriller than a historical event.
And it gets even wilder. The first assassination attempt, a bomb thrown at the Archduke's car, it actually failed. The bomb bounced off the vehicle and exploded under the car behind them.
Wow, so Franz Ferdinand survives a bombing. You'd think he'd hightail it out of Sarajevo at that point.
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
But instead of fleeing, he insisted on visiting those wounded in the bombing at the hospital, a decision that, as we know, would seal his fate.
It's almost as if he was tempting fate. But what happened next? How did this 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip, the eventual assassin, how did he even cross paths with the Archduke after a failed bombing and a change of plans?
It was a truly bizarre twist of fate. A series of miscommunications and a wrong turn led the Archduke's car directly into the path of Gavrilo Princip, who just happened to be in the vicinity after the botched bombing attempt.
So it was pure chance that put the man who would change the course of history face to face with his target. It's almost too incredible to believe.
It's a reminder that even in the grand sweep of history, chance encounters and individual choices can have world-altering consequences. And in this case, Princip, a young man fueled by a potent mix of idealism and desperation, seized his opportunity.
This is where we really start to see how one individual, armed with a pistol and driven by conviction, can become the catalyst for a global conflict.
And as we delve deeper into this deep dive, you'll see how the assassination becomes the spark that ignites the tinderbox of European tensions, setting off a chain reaction that would lead to one of the deadliest conflicts in human history.
So, with the stage set and the fateful encounter playing out on the streets of Sarajevo, how does this localized act of violence transform into a global war? What happens next? That's what I'm dying to know.
Well, to understand that, we need to examine the immediate aftermath of the assassination and how Austria-Hungary, fueled by outrage and emboldened by a powerful ally, decides to use this tragedy to assert its dominance in the region.
Okay, I'm ready for the next chapter in this historical thriller. Let's see how the powder keg explodes. All right, so we set the stage. Europe is a powder keg, tensions are high, and Franz Ferdinand's assassination has just lit the fuse. What happens next? How does this localized act of violence escalate into a full-blown world war?
Well, as you can imagine, Austria-Hungary is furious. I mean, they see this as a direct attack on their sovereignty, and they're determined to make Serbia pay. But there's another crucial player in this equation, Germany. They issue Austria-Hungary what historians often call a blank check, essentially pledging their unconditional support, no matter what action Austria-Hungary decides to take.
Wow, a blank check. That's a pretty bold move. It seems like Germany is throwing gasoline on an already raging fire.
It certainly emboldened Austria-Hungary. A month after the assassination, they issue Serbia an ultimatum, a list of demands so harsh and humiliating that they were practically designed to be rejected. They demanded a full investigation into the assassination with Austrian participation, the suppression of any anti-Austrian propaganda in Serbia, and even the dismissal of Serbian government officials deemed hostile to Austria-Hungary.
So Austria-Hungary is basically flexing its muscles,
Yes.
trying to assert its dominance over Serbia. What was Serbia's response? Did they just cave to the pressure?
Serbia, backed by Russia, attempts to negotiate. They agree to some of the demands, but ultimately refuse to allow Austrian officials to participate in the investigation. They saw that as a blatant violation of their sovereignty, a step too far.
I can see how that would be a sticking point for Serbia. It's like Austria-Hungary is trying to dictate their internal affairs.
Exactly. And this refusal, however understandable, gives Austria-Hungary the justification they need. On July 28, 1914, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. The dominoes begin to fall.
It's chilling how quickly things escalate. You have this regional conflict that spirals out of control, pulling in all these other countries because of these pre-existing alliances. It's a reminder that in a world this interconnected, even a localized conflict can have global ramifications.
The alliance system, meant to deter war, ends up having the opposite effect. It's like a house of cards. One wrong move, and the whole structure collapses. Russia, bound by its alliance to Serbia, begins to mobilize its troops. Germany, seeing this as a threat, declares war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, is then drawn into the conflict. And within a matter of days, Europe is engulfed in a war that no one truly anticipated.
So from a single gunshot in Sarajevo, you have this cascading series of events that leads to a global conflict. It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control. It's almost hard to grasp the magnitude of it all.
The scale of World War I is difficult to comprehend. Millions of lives lost, empires toppled, and the world forever changed. And at the heart of it all lies this young man, Gavrilo Princip, who becomes both a villain and a folk hero, depending on the perspective.
That's an interesting point. I remember reading in one of the articles that Princip's legacy is still fiercely debated, even today. Some view him as a terrorist, a radical who ignited a global catastrophe. Others see him as a freedom fighter, someone who struck a blow against an oppressive empire. How do you make sense of such a complex legacy?
It's a reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's full of nuance, conflicting perspectives, and interpretations that change over time. Princip was undoubtedly a product of his time. A young man swept up in the tides of nationalism and yearning for a better future for his people. But the consequences of his actions were undeniably devastating.
It makes you wonder, could he have possibly understood the magnitude of what he was setting in motion? Did he have any inkling that his act of defiance would lead to such unimaginable suffering?
It's impossible to know what went through his mind in those final moments, but it's a question worth pondering. And it speaks to the broader point that even seemingly small actions can have unintended consequences that ripple far beyond our immediate grasp.
Okay, so we've explored the immediate aftermath of the assassination and how it triggers a chain reaction that leads to World War I. But I'm curious, what happened to Austria-Hungary in the end? Did they achieve their goal of crushing Serbia?
Ironically, their quest for dominance ultimately led to their own demise. World War I shattered the fragile foundation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The war effort drained their resources, exacerbated internal tensions, and ultimately led to the empire's collapse in 1918. It's a classic case of hubris, leading to downfall.
So the very act of aggression that they hoped would solidify their power ultimately backfired, leading to their own destruction. It's a powerful lesson in unintended consequences.
And it highlights the interconnectedness of history. One event, even one as seemingly isolated as an assassination, can set in motion forces that reshape the entire world. We see this time again throughout history.
Speaking of broader historical trends, I'm curious about the role of media and propaganda in this whole affair. I remember reading that the initial news of the assassination was met with shock and outrage across Europe, but not necessarily with calls for war. That sentiment seemed to evolve over time. How did the media contribute to shaping public opinion and ultimately paving the way for war?
That's a great observation. The media, even back then, played a crucial role in shaping the narrative. Early headlines focused on the personal tragedy, the assassination of an archduke and his wife. There were heart-wrenching stories about their orphan children, the brutal nature of the crime, and the sense of shock and disbelief that gripped the world.
It humanized the victims, turning this political assassination into a personal tragedy that resonated with people across Europe.
Exactly. But as the days turned into weeks, the tone shifted. The media, often influenced by government propaganda, began to frame Serbia as the aggressor, a rogue nation that needed to be punished. They played up the threat of Serbian nationalism, painted a picture of a volatile and dangerous Balkan region, and ultimately helped to create a climate of fear and suspicion that made war seem inevitable.
It's a sobering reminder that we should always be critical consumers of information, especially when it comes to issues of war and peace. The media can be a powerful tool for shaping public opinion, and it's important to be aware of the biases and agendas that might be influencing the narratives we're presented with.
It's a lesson that's as relevant today as it was back then. We live in an age of information overload where news travels at the speed of light, and it's easy to get caught up in the frenzy of the moment. But it's more important than ever to pause, to question, and to seek out diverse perspectives before forming our own opinions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The political machinations, the role of the media, the cascading events that led to war, and even the complex legacy of Gavrilo Princip. But there's one question that keeps nagging at me. What if Franz Ferdinand had lived? Could he have prevented World War I? Or was the conflict already brewing, just waiting for a different spark to ignite it?
Ah, the great what-if of history. It's a question that has tantalized historians for over a century. Some believe that Franz Ferdinand, with his vision for reform and his willingness to challenge the status quo, might have been able to avert the war. They argue that his proposed reforms, granting more autonomy to the Slavic regions within the empire, could have eased tensions in the Balkans and potentially undermined the appeal of Serbian nationalism. It's certainly a compelling argument.
So you're saying that he might have been able to save the Austro-Hungarian Empire from itself, transforming it into a more just and equitable society that could have withstood the pressures of nationalism.
It's a possibility. He was, after all, a man of considerable power and influence, and his personal tragedy adds another layer of complexity to this whole saga. But of course, we can't know for sure what would have happened. History is full of contingencies, and it's impossible to rewind the clock and play out different scenarios.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot. You can pull on one thread, but it inevitably affects all the others. It's a reminder that history is a complex tapestry, woven from countless individual threads and forces that interact in ways that are often unpredictable.
Precisely. And that's what makes it so endlessly fascinating. We can study the past, analyze the events and personalities, but ultimately there will always be mysteries, unanswered questions, and alternative paths that we can only imagine.
It's a reminder that we're all part of this grand narrative, and that even seemingly insignificant actions can have ripple effects that extend far beyond our immediate understanding.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of this story, the July crisis. The weeks following Franz Ferdinand's assassination were a whirlwind of diplomatic maneuvering, ultimatums, and escalating tensions that ultimately pushed Europe over the edge and into the abyss of war.
Okay, let's dive into those pivotal weeks. What were the key decisions, the miscalculations, and the missed opportunities that ultimately sealed Europe's fate? So we're teetering on the brink of war. What were the key moments during this July crisis? The ones that ultimately pushed Europe over the edge?
Think of it as this frantic game of diplomatic chess, with each move just heightening the stakes. You have Austria-Hungary determined to punish Serbia, Germany emboldening them, Russia feeling obligated to protect Serbia, and France and Britain trying to navigate this increasingly volatile situation. It's a recipe for disaster.
And all of this is happening against this backdrop of intense nationalism, a glorification of military power, and almost a sense that war, however horrific, might actually be inevitable.
Precisely. There was this pervasive belief, especially among the ruling elites, that war was a legitimate tool of statecraft, a way to resolve disputes and assert national dominance. It's a chilling reminder of how differently the world viewed conflict back then.
It's hard to imagine such a mindset today, especially with the knowledge of the horrors that World War I unleashed. But back then, war was often romanticized, seen as a test of national strength and a path to glory.
It's a stark contrast to our modern understanding of conflict. But it's crucial to understand that historical context, to fully grasp how events unfolded. So back to the July crisis, you have this flurry of diplomatic cables, frantic negotiations, attempts to mediate the situation. But the momentum towards war is already building.
It's like a runaway train hurtling towards a collision that everyone sees coming but can't seem to prevent. Were there any moments where it felt like things might de-escalate? Or was war inevitable at that point?
There were glimmers of hope, moments where it seemed like cooler heads might prevail. But the mistrust between the powers was too deep, the alliance systems too rigid, and the sense of urgency, too acute. Once Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, it triggered a chain reaction that proved impossible to stop.
So even if key players had acted differently, made different decisions, or taken a step back from the brink, are you saying that the underlying tensions were so profound that war was almost inevitable?
It's a question that historians continue to debate. But it's clear that the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, while the immediate trigger, it wasn't the sole cause of World War I. It exposed the deep fissures within the European system, the simmering rivalries, the nationalistic fervor, and the ultimately fatal flaws of the alliance system.
It's a sobering thought that this global conflict, with all its unimaginable suffering and long-lasting consequences, might have been the culmination of forces that were already in motion, just waiting for any spark to ignite them.
And that brings us back to Franz Ferdinand. Would his vision for reform, had he lived, have been enough to alter the course of history? Could he have appeased the nationalistic sentiments within the empire, eased tensions in the Balkans, and prevented the chain reaction that led to war?
It's the ultimate what if. One will never truly know the answer to, but exploring these counterfactuals, imagining different paths that history might have taken, it's a valuable exercise. It helps us to understand the complexities of the past and appreciate the fragility of the present.
It also reminds us that history is not simply a series of predetermined events. It's a a dynamic interplay of choices, actions, and chance occurrences. And while we can't change the past, we can learn from it, use it to inform our understanding of the present, and hopefully chart a more peaceful course for the future.
That's a powerful message to end on. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and its world-altering consequences, what are some key takeaways you hope our listeners will ponder?
First, I hope this deep dive has challenged some of the simplistic narratives surrounding this event. It wasn't just a single act of violence that plunged the world into war. It was the culmination of decades of complex geopolitical maneuvering, simmering tensions, and a system primed for conflict.
It's a reminder that historical events rarely happen in isolation. They're part of a larger web of interconnected forces that we need to understand to fully grasp their significance.
Second, I think it's crucial to appreciate the role of individuals in shaping history. Franz Ferdinand, Gavrilo Princip, the diplomats, the monarchs, the journalists. All of them played a part in this unfolding drama, making choices that had unforeseen and often devastating consequences.
It's both empowering and humbling, isn't it? Empowering because it suggests that individual actions can matter, that they can shape the course of events, but also humbling because it highlights the unintended consequences that can ripple far beyond our immediate intentions.
And finally, I hope this deep dive has encouraged you, our listener, to think critically about the narratives we're presented with, especially when it comes to issues of war and peace. Question the sources, seek out diverse perspectives, and remember that history is rarely as straightforward as it seems.
It's about digging deeper, challenging assumptions, and engaging in thoughtful dialogue, just like we've done in this deep dive. And on that note, I want to thank our listener for suggesting this incredibly thought-provoking topic. It's been a fascinating journey.
Absolutely. And if you, dear listener, have any other historical mysteries, pivotal events, or fascinating figures you'd like us to explore, be sure to let us know. We're always eager to embark on new deep dives and uncover the hidden depths of history.
Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those curiosity fires burning.